for whatever reason, I was thinking back to the first time that I said out loud, I want to be a teacher, which was when I was touring colleges with my dad. And I'm not like, I can't quite remember why I said that. So it's a little bit of, chronological back and forth, because I do know that the reason I think I wanted to be a teacher is I liked helping people. And, I had a sense of that cliche, like, oh, people's light bulb will go off. I think I had a sense, though I couldn't articulate it at the time, that I had an unusual way of looking at things, which doesn't mean a good way of looking at things. And then, I was a would-be intellectual. I learned later that I had none of the discipline to be an actual intellectual or, an authority on anything that you're supposed to study, right? A scholar. I'm not in any way a scholar, but I had the pretense of being that, as one of these people who lived thinking that the more facile you were with ideas, the sort of better a person you were. And that was sort of the status, the kind of New Yorker status, New Yorker magazine status. So I was chasing that. And a good place to chase that is graduate school. And then if you finish graduate school and can get a job in college, which neither of which I did or could do. So I started teaching in a prep school, although I, taught while I was a graduate student. And that's a good place to stand up and pontificate and, to think you're smart. So that's what I did until I learned that I was mostly an idiot. So that's how I got into education.
That's hilarious. Well, I'm really glad to have you on the podcast. Thank you for being here.
Good to be here. Thank you for having me.
I would love to hear what interests you and captivates your mind in watching, listening, reading things.
I'll start with the least one, which is watching things. I used to watch a lot of things. I don't watch as much now. The last thing that, sort of common thing that I watched was Ted Lasso. After years of people saying it's so good. And for some reason, my thinking, it can't be that good. It's one of those. I'm sure it's just sort of popular. I watched, the first season back to back to back to back, in laughing my ass off and crying uncontrollably. So that's sort of the last, I guess, popular thing I've watched. Reading, I just read a book that, if you're into sort of the self-help game, I think a lot of those books are mediocre. And I've read more of them now because of being more of a coach than a teacher. But I just met this wonderful guy named Jim Grout, who runs an incredible organization in Brattleboro, Massachusetts, that's done a lot of good work. And he wrote this book, When in Doubt, Give Them Your Heart, which is sort of like,
Ted
you know,
Lasso?
yeah, it's a little bit like Ted Lasso. Like if you don't know anything, just give them your heart. Now he has a lot more stuff about great team building ideas. The organization has worked with like the Boston Bruins and European soccer teams and corporates and all of that. And I just think he lays it out. I mean, all of these books are a little bit similar, but he just lays it out really well. So
Mm.
that's for that. And then I just reread a tiny little book. I can't even remember the name of it. Do I have it here? Oh yeah, here it is. That nobody will ever be able to find because it's self-published, called The Blue Spark, which is written about 20 years ago, which is sort of about how the thing that America sells is the idea. It sells ideas. And that that's sort of been its, whatever you're gonna say, like reason to be or whatever, and how
Yeah.
that has been a problem for the place in certain ways.
Yeah.
And then I just started reading this book I really like called, I don't know if you can see it, To Photograph is to Learn How to Die. And it's a little dense. And at least so far, what it's really about is poetry. I mean,
Mm.
the, the argument is basically, it hasn't even gotten to photography yet, is that what it is, like anything that is also what it is not. And I have a few small ridiculous sayings. And one of them is, it is what it is not, because I hate the saying, it is what it is. It's always what it is not. The the face of the person, being so ambitious, that's not what it is. It's sadness or trying to make up for something. And everything's an advertisement, and some are more cynical or more, hidden from the person than others. But so that's in a way what he's saying. And
Mhm.
so that's why I like it. And he's clearly super well read. I mean, it's worth reading if only because there's a million wonderful quotations in
References?
it.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm reading. What am I listening to? I'm more of an audiophile. It's my one vice of expenses. I have a 2010 car, and I love eating out, but only at sort of, I don't like fancy restaurants, but I like good audio equipment. And I'm saying that it shapes a lot of my aesthetic understanding, but also I should be a, super music guy. And when I was in high school, I DJ'd the dances, but right now I'm listening to a lot of LCD sound system. I think they have some of the best grooves ever. And I think people who like them think that, and they even have a song that's about like the record company wanting a hit, but we don't do hits, which
Mhm.
they definitely could. It's sort of almost this clear idea to be not in the mainstream, even though they're a band, a sort of cult band. Adrian Lenker, who is also the lead, she does solo stuff, but also the lead singer of a band called Big Thief. And she's got to be one of the best songwriters. I'll say for your listeners that I've been back in America for a couple of years, and for 10 years before that, I was living in the Netherlands and, and also South Africa. And I don't think there's a store, certainly in the Netherlands, probably in South Africa, and probably in all of Europe, that is as ill making as a CVS. Like to walk into a CVS with all those yellow tags, and maybe people can go in and not notice. I'm sort of maybe absurdly sensitive to this stuff and people think I'm crazy, but I think it's designed almost to make you ill. And again, that just doesn't exist in the other parts of the world that I know.
I think you do have to leave here to notice how I think it's really
Yes.
easy, like the frog in the water that slowly heats up, where
Right. You just
can be
yeah,
you cannot notice that stuff. So, I mean, that speaks to the importance, I think, of travel too, to get
totally.
perspective on like what is normal, what is healthy, what is, yeah, everything kind of zooms into perspective, especially if you do, travel to places unlike the one you come from more.
Yeah,
And you're,
I mean,
yeah.
yeah, the thing you learn most about, sorry to cut you off, is home when you travel. That's what you learn about. And
That's
uh,
right. Yeah,
yeah,
and family and what does it look
absolutely.
like, right? Because
Right.
you think
Daily
it's
life. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, you think it's all the same everywhere. There's some like, "Oh, this is just human," and then you find out, nope, nope,
Yeah.
actually,
Right.
there's so much variation. Yeah, yeah. There's not enough lifetimes for it. Well, I'm so curious, you shared with me that, you're from the field of education. You've also mentioned being a coach. So, where did that all begin for you, your interest in teaching and learning?
Well, it sort of depends on how you calibrate it between, I guess, 15 years and 5 years or something.
What shifted you into more of the coaching space?
Well, a few things, and if it's okay, I'll go back to talk a little bit about sort of my troubles with education, even though for sure there's nothing. I mean, I really like coaching. I love teaching too, so it's not like that's been hammered out of me. I've always been a little bit I'm certainly better at sort of working with people than presenting information. And here's my favorite review of my teaching, and I can, talk about sort of the arc or the ups and downs of my teaching. But my favorite review came from a student, and this was in South Africa, and it says, there you're called Mr. So I'm
Mhm.
Mr. Ted. Mr. Ted is dot, 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 I don't know. So, I've never been kind of an information presenter, but, I'm somebody who likes to ask questions that I don't know the answer to. And some kids love that. And some, it really upsets them because they just want to get the stuff and get the grade. So, and what I tell, I know I'm I tend to be elliptical and digressive, but what I tell teachers now is it seems simple, but you're teaching the kids, and the kids are the puzzle, not the stuff. And what every young teacher does is put a lot of things on the syllabus or the daily plan and expect because they've put it on the page, it will translate. Now, at the height of irresponsibility, I don't do any of that. I show up. And the reason I'm saying that, which again has some advantages and some real liabilities, is that so in addition to this sense that I could connect with kids and help them one-on-one, depending on how you count it. I don't think I was a bad teacher. Sometimes I was very good and sometimes really terrible. So at my school was kind of an artsy school, and it started to play this as a private school, and the only business model anyone thinks will work is to get kids into college.
Right.
So this I think most schools have a heart place. I mean, lots of schools don't have any heart or soul, but it will be the sports field or the chemistry department, it sort of depends on the school. And here it was in a beautiful way, the art department. And instead of doubling down on, which I felt they should have, both, I guess, because it's what's appealing to me, but also because I could see, I think, that what the internet meant was that being an artist was going to be just as good a way to have a career as anything else. And, this was around the time of Pixar, which I actually taught the first Toy Story or Toy Story 2. And it just seemed to me like being able to make art would be valuable.
Yeah.
But they started to sort of shave that towards more conventional curriculum. I didn't like that. I think when I was teaching, the student body sort of still was working sort of in the embers, the last, or whatever, whispers of the 60s, and the way that schools had sort of tried to take in alternativeness or progressiveness or whatever. And by the time I had been there for 5, 6, 7 years, that was gone. And schools like the one I was teaching at went from being sort of dysfunctional families to, whatever you want to say, poorly run businesses or better run businesses, because they had to play this college game to have a outward facing view.
Yeah.
And so more and more students said to me, well, how do I get an A? What do I have to do? Which kids really hadn't been saying to me when I first started teaching. I mean, some, but not in the same
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
I would say, well, why do you need a good grade to get into a good college? Well, why do you need to go to a good college to have a good job? Why do you need a good job to, have a good salary? And the irony was that a lot of these kids, not all of them, but enough of them, were really, you know, the most protected people in the history of the earth. They could have graduated from high school or college and snorted cocaine for 10 years and had enough wealth in their family to protect them from that. And so this line of reasoning was nutty to me, especially because I just wanted to walk in and talk about, Hamlet or Wallace Stevens or Toni Morrison or, whatever we were reading. And they couldn't do that. And I can come back to this because it shaped a lot of my thinking, because sort of the gravity of money was in the room, or the sort of moon or sun was casting its light down on us casting its darkness, maybe it's down on us. So we couldn't do this wonderful thing.
Yeah.
And then the real deal breaker was when schools wanted to be laptop schools, and it's nothing like it is now. But even more than using a laptop in the class, which I found super disruptive right from the beginning, was this thing of you have to post your homework, what you're going to do tomorrow, so that mom and dad can check up on it. And, now it's this family cycle of, sorry, neurosis, anxiety about how, you know, junior can get a good grade.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
didn't want to teach that way. And I thought it wasn't effective teaching in general, and certainly for me. And what I tend to say about it is there's nothing wrong. Like, it's great that an eagle flaps its wings. It's totally different sort of oscillation if it's a mosquito flapping its wings. They're both doing the same thing. And as educators, we become mosquitoes. Did you study? Are you ready for the test? You know, I'm checking in with you about the whole, about even what you're doing in class. And okay, there's really a time and place for stress. Like the curtain's gonna, rise at 8. Do you know your lines for the
Mhm,
school play? We
mhm.
have a big game, whatever, soccer, football, whatever it is, ultimate frisbee, which is my thing. Great. Like you should feel a little, I need to get ready for this and this is, but to go through that on a minute to minute, day to day basis is part of why, you mentioned earlier, and that same thing happened to me. You burned out from teaching. It's why administrators burn out. And it's one of the reasons we have so many unhealthy kids now. I mean, I do coach a team of high schoolers and I know there's other things, COVID and the phone, which were not true in the era I'm talking about, but some of the kids are just so straight up anxious about being in the world. And I mean, people talk about it, but it's a crisis. It's a national crisis.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
not, of course, being able to see that in that clear way or express it in that way, I felt that viscerally. And then when I got the chance to move to the Netherlands because of I had been taking kids there for a few years, I jumped at the chance.
The Netherlands gets a very good reputation on the executive function side of things. If you don't practice making decisions, if you don't practice goal-oriented behavior, if it's constantly being imposed on you, not only do you not develop the skills, but you just develop neuroses, and then your brain is in survival mode all the time, which means you can't even access your executive functioning.
Right.
So, it's like you kinda have to not throw someone in the deep end, but you have to let them experience life, and where countries like the Netherlands get such a good reputation on this side is they let kids practice those skills without life altering consequences, right? Because in the States where yeah, I've worked with elementary students who are like, I have to get a good grade on this, otherwise I'm gonna fail and I'll never go to college and I'll work at McDonald's the rest of my life. Like, that kind of
Yeah.
stress on the brain is gonna limit your higher
Right.
cognitive functioning, so yeah,
Yeah. If you're living with a bear all the time,
all the time.
it's hard to, yeah.
It's really dangerous in the early years of life where some of that neural architecture is being built about how you respond to stress
Right.
and deal with things. So not only are we limiting executive functioning, but we're limiting regulation.
Right, and this is not only obviously not just education, but,
No.
the division of wealth, which has meant that some people are living with a bear of like, I'm mom or dad, and how am I gonna get food to my kids?
Yeah.
It's I won't if we talk about the Netherlands, I'll never shut up, but to first of all, the biking there is transformative. Like, people have no idea until they see it, and to see parents taking their 6-year-old, like they're accompanying them when they're 6 years old, through sort of the densest part of the city, or by the time they're 8 or 10, by 10 or certainly 12, they're biking to school themselves.
Yeah.
So changing, especially I think for girls, the sense of independence, and you have to
Mhm.
solve the problem of how you're gonna get to school.
Mhm.
And in terms of the wealth thing, it's a rich country. There are essentially no homeless people.
They have social safety nets,
Unbelievable.
like healthcare.
For 2 different reasons, I had to be in the hospital. One was for something for myself, and I sat in the waiting room, they took care of it, it was a little thing. And a friend of mine unfortunately got sort of sick there, had an accident, and, they were in the hospital in a room with nobody. I mean, in other words, like, it wasn't crowded, it wasn't quite chaotic. Doctors who understood like could speak the English of complicated things. And, I mean, I said I've just been in the hospital sort of sitting with my friend, no stress in the hospital. And it was easier for me to get health care there. I mean, easier in terms of navigating it in a different language, in a different culture, and everybody has these crazy stories. When I came back here in 2024, okay, I've got to get a primary doctor. And the woman said, okay, we've got an appointment for you in March. And this was like January in 2026. Like, well, I'm going to be dead by then. I mean, and so all of that stuff at a big level or a small level adds to the sense that you're Like, what's the point? You're living with a bear. And anyway, of course, we're not, to say the least, we're not addressing any of that now.
No. When you first got into teaching, what did you love about it? How did that nourish you?
Well, a number of things, I guess. One was how, bright and creative kids can be really at any age. I could find it here. I have this is obviously much younger kids. I have a friend who has 4 kids, and he's kept track of the funny things they say sort of from 3 till 8 or something.
Mm.
And it's like the funniest book I've ever read. And I think
Mhm.
every parent should make this book now that you can self-publish. I
Yeah,
mean,
such
it's
a good idea.
definitely a bestseller at his house. And, we could stop the podcast and I could just read from that and everybody would be made a genius right away. It's just incredible. So it's different, obviously, when you're talking 14, 15, whatever, 18-year-olds. But there's similarities to that. There's really creative things, which is part of why I vastly prefer an education system that is about freedom and creativity, sort of all the cliche progressive stuff, rather than, what Seth Godin says, like school's about compliance. It's so, that's one of the things it crushes out of people. But I really appreciated that. I did like getting to, I guess, test my intellectual chops, my ability to just go into a place and start yammering without a lot of preparation,
Mm.
which has again advantages and disadvantages. And it really, I really liked the puzzle of
Mhm.
individual kids. I was drawn more to that, even though I really do love literature. I was drawn more to that than the book, let's say.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and also when you have this happened a few times, like a few sort of stretches in particular, but it's always true. The thing that I miss most about not teaching in a regular way, it's colleagues for sure, which a lot of people miss, but a good sort of, you know, English office or English and history office or wherever the teachers meet is a hilarious place
Mhm.
when teachers are talking about their own foibles and like I'm not ready for class and like all of that because I think it's the fun dynamics of or it's a way to address the fun and difficult dynamics that happen between what I'll call adults and kids.
Yeah,
It's like I laughed so much during most of my teaching career. I miss that.
yeah, yeah. Mhm.
They're a model for being in the world,
Mm.
which is why it, it's never the stuff. Even if the person goes from my English class to being an English professor, it isn't the stuff. They don't remember anything I taught them about Mark Twain, who I guess you can't teach anymore, but oh, well, this guy Ted sort of was the first person to help me, got me thinking in this way. And I'm not suggesting that have done that for most of my kids. There's a lot of teachers with good structure and championing their kids. And again, they don't remember what they learned. They remember that teacher really gave me discipline or gave me the curiosity or gave me the drive. And the more you limit that in a teacher, the less you have of that. And one of the things that also started to happen at my school, as I was sort of saying, it went from being a dysfunctional family to a sort of semi functional business, is that the weirdo teachers got drummed out.
Yeah, mhm.
And I get it. Weirdo teachers who like reach 10 or 20% of their kids are, on paper less good than the great teacher who everybody loves and the parents love. But those weirdo teachers, and sometimes I was that teacher, but, weirdo may be a pejorative word, but I'm actually trying to put it in a complimentary context. There were kids who gravitated to those teachers who would not gravitate to me or the star teachers at a school. And that's what got them through.
Yeah,
That's what made them feel healthy. And it's much harder to have those teachers now because, the 70% or the 50% of parents will say, well, why does my kid have to put up with this, you know, crappy teacher?
yeah, yeah,
And the answer should be because we're a village or something like that. Anyway,
yeah, yeah. No, the primary way that the brain learns, especially in the early years, is through modeling, through seeing examples and then mimicking what they see. And so understanding that really puts an emphasis on how important to have a diversity of
Exactly.
modeling,
Yes.
which is why having one kind of teacher or super streamlined is really a deficit for the children because they get limited in seeing different behaviors. So limited, they got their family and they got school. That's it. That's what they got.
Right.
They have stuff they see on TV, but it might not be very relatable. You don't really have those generalizable skills right away. So, yeah.
Right.
So, I wanted to ask you about what you think the power of a teacher can be, where we can switch our lens a little bit to like, where's the hope or where's the opportunity here?
Wait, there's hope.
There has
I'm
to
so
be.
glad to have done this podcast just to learn. No, no. Okay, well, I can give you. I'll try to give you a brief answer, but I could go on again for a long time. So first of all, again, this is in part why I sort of left full time teaching was because of laptops, and I just kept saying, well, what's the advantage? I mean, I heard somebody say that like compared to a typewriter, a laptop and Word or something is a real upgrade of productivity. But where's the next thing? Like, Twitter isn't or whatever. So, and I feel that times 1,000 now with the phone and AI. And my answer, like the last two writing courses I taught, all of the writing was done by hand in class.
Mm, mhm.
And, I just had no interest in reading what they put on a page. I told them, you can do it. Sometimes what I did was like have them write in class and then you could type it up on a laptop. But I would really, so my answer is radical, maybe. I would say you can't touch an electronic device all day at school or maybe like for half an hour to do research. One of the things I've felt forever or since the computer came into being is that you should go into a school like under no circumstances should you be able to bring your phone into school. The reason that gets such pushback, as you may know, at least in my anecdotal experience, this is a weird one. First of all, and I know I'm digressing here, I'll come back to what I was going to say, that the parents don't want to tell the kids no phone because they're just as addicted. And there's this fantasy, and I've heard a number of people say this,
I know
that
what it
if
is.
there's a school shooter, the parents want to be able to have this like last message as if that's going to, as if this sort of worst tragedy in the world can happen to your kid that like not sorry, it's really grim saying goodbye to them at 2:13 as opposed to 8:15 in the morning is worth destroying their whole education. So there was a certain time. I mean, I went to school. When I went to high school, there was a place where everybody could gather and smoke cigarettes. So, in essence, what we're saying now with the phone is you must smoke. So, the one of the way, like what I think should happen, because it's great, like when a school in America connects with a school in Asia or whatever, there should be, those big Macs or big computers at a round table,
Yeah.
and there should be whatever X number per student so that if you're using the computer, we have to negotiate, hey, Annabelle, I need to use it in the next half hour. We negotiate that, or I'm looking at what you're doing. It's
Mm.
a place where a limited resource, which America is terrible at, would help everything. But right now, I would say, I think the best education in America right now is a vocational education where it's a week of books or whatever and a week of cooking or like first of all, those are the jobs that are actually sustainable
And not replaceable
and not
by.
replaceable. Like you can't get AI to fix your car.
Uh-uh.
And I I think it's a much healthier education. I wish I had done it because, again, I just became for a little while an intellectual snob and I can't cook. I can't do these things a human being should be able to do in a
You can. You can learn.
well, I can talk and I can read and I'm not without some, sort of good things, but, and every kid says, God, I wish they would teach me financial literacy. And, in terms of the sort of, there's another book, is it called Working with Your Hands or Shop Work? It's about a guy who his last name is Crawford, and what he talks about it. There was a show called people who drove like ice trucks or trucks through Alaska, and it was weirdly popular. And he starts by saying, "Why is this show popular? Because you're watching people do real work." And he's like, he gets a PhD and he's in some super think tank, and he hates it. So he starts becoming a motorcycle maintenance guy. And the first thing he realizes is, wow, this is really intellectual, difficult, creative work. And the last thing I'll say here is that I had every teacher at a, expensive private school has had this. I had exactly two kids who it was clear what they were going to do in life. Like one was born painting at like a year and a half. She colored her room. And the other you couldn't you couldn't get the guitar out of his hands, and he became a great jazz guitarist. But if he was busking on the street, like nobody ever thought he was going to not be a guitarist. And we just all gave him D's because it was too complicated to give him F's, and he didn't care. So, and the reason I'm saying
I
that
love.
because the rest of us are like, I think the classic story, I think I should be a banker, and then I wish I had been a poet, like all of that stuff.
Yeah.
But there are so many kids who would be so much happier making shoes than being the vice president of something at Nike. And that's what they end up doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think a sane future is you walk down a street and there's 20 people, there's 20 shoe shops,
Yeah.
and you go to the one you like in the same way you go to the restaurant you like. It's no different.
Yeah.
And you make a reasonable living making something.
Who do you feel like has shaped your thinking about how people learn and, what's shaped your perspective? And you could speak in a big general way or maybe more recently, if that makes more sense.
I said, I'm not much of a scholar. I tend to read like the first few pages of books rather than the whole
No,
thing.
but
But
being influenced can be
no, I
all kinds of
understand.
stuff.
That was just sort
Yeah.
of my first thought, like Parker Palmer, who I think is great. When I was first teaching, TED Talks were just starting, and that famous TED Ken Robinson talk, I felt was right on the money.
Yes. Yeah. I know what
Uh,
you're talking about.
I'll send you these other, I have two favorite other TED Talks, which I'll send that I think are important. But well, one I'll say, it's called The Greatest Kindergarten You've Ever Seen, and it's in Japan, and the Japanese architect talks about it, and mostly the most important thing is that it's round with a roof. Have you seen this? And,
I have.
the kids are just running. That's
Yep.
basically what they're doing, and it's glorious. And, again, but we think in terms of boxes and prisons, like the architecture is very revealing.
Did it.
So the other things that I think have been influential, I suppose, are, as anyone happens, like personal lessons. When I was first teaching, I wanted to be, and I was the hardest teacher on my campus, like hardest grades, hardest in class. And then, kids were crying. Like a kid would cry every year. And, I thought, well, why am I doing this? So I became the easiest teacher and basically almost got fired for how I was teaching, which was legitimate. Like at a certain point, it just became ridiculous. But what I would do is go into class and like even at the start of a semester or whatever, where I taught had just 5-week blocks, which has
Oh, cool.
taught me a lot too. And I would say like, well, what do you want to do? And, you know, no one ever said, well, let's just get ice cream, which I would have said, okay. But
Yeah. What did they say?
well, sometimes, and, they would say, well, let's read and talk about it. But mostly they would say, well, why are you asking? Or how are we going to decide? Or, why can't you tell us? And sometimes that would go on for days or weeks. And I thought it was fascinating. They hated it mostly. They just thought, oh, great, this is going to be a joke. But I think, I went to this sort of when I became a department chair, which I was really bad at briefly. And I was sent to this like professional development department chair thing, how to be a department chair. Okay. And I always remember, this one of the people running it saying, what are the most important, you know, what's the most important part of a class? The first 5 minutes when you lay out everything and, make it clear what's going to happen. And that probably influenced me in just the wrong way because, as we talked about a little bit earlier, like I hate systems. And so I immediately decided, well, I'm never going to do that because, like, I'm glad there are rules to the game. And I think it's, valuable that you have to learn your lines in for the play. So I probably, I think I did abandon any reasonable structure for too long and too much.
Mm.
But if learning is an adventure, you can't say, here are the 100 steps you have to walk in the next whatever hour.
Uh-huh.
So
You need like a treasure map, but a way to choose your own adventure.
yeah,
Yeah,
right. And it's, if we're, again, nature is a good model. Not that I'm much of a camper. Hey, we're gonna explore these woods. I'll make sure you don't fall off a cliff, but I'm not gonna tell you where to go.
right.
And that's another thing you learn from traveling, right? Although far too much now travel is about finding the place and taking the picture of it. But you have to adventure a little bit, and that's a really valuable experience. So that has shaped me some. Shakespeare has shaped me a fair bit about what it means to be a person, and so how you understand Shakespeare and Freud and, my own therapy stuff. There's basically what I think of as the drama of recognition and how we're always in basically a mommy daddy dynamic. And certainly Amsterdam taught me an endless number of things as a city, as a culture. Then being in South Africa, where I worked at this incredible school called African Leadership Academy, and the magic of that school. I don't love the pedagogy because it's basically prep school, get into college pedagogy, although, you know, for that demographic to get into an American school that can pay for you is transformative. So I understand that. But anyway, they bring kids from all over the continent to South Africa. It's it's become a little bit of a famous school, but what that means is you have a diversity that makes like a school with, kids from 50 states in America look homogenous. It's incredible. And what's fascinating among whole slew of things is that as a, stupid white American, the first, like, it wasn't until the second year that I sort of I spent like 3 to 6 months each year. So the second year I went there, like, I was like, oh, really? Like, people from, sort of the top part of Africa really don't get along with sub-Saharan Africans. Who knew, right? Because, if however I can read in a sort of typical superficial way, race on the streets of an America, like total ignoramus in
Yeah.
that context. So, that's a good reminder of how much we need to learn about that. We all, do about that kind of stuff. So, and then really teaching at this community college recently, I was so much more interested in teaching those kids as poorly as I taught them than the sort of middle class, but still college ambitious kids that I taught at the local high school, because it was a totally different kind of puzzle. And I thought if I could get it right, I could help them more. I got it wrong and I didn't help them at all. But the energy there's a lot that's sad about it because people, they don't have an ambition. That's not right. There's not a model for ambition. And I think a large part of that is not because, any stereotype about their class. It's because vocational work has also been disappearing and devalued. Kids that I knew when I was growing up who were like, oh, my dad's a mechanic or a carpenter, and I sort of can
Mhm.
see myself doing that. There's not, as far as I can tell, nearly as much model for that either, and again, it would have been transformative for some of them to then go on to whatever, UMass, which some of them did, or Smith or Amherst, which are the local sort of elite schools. But even having that, whatever it is, the good life that is at least represented to you, it seemed like that wasn't there, but the energy was totally different and much more compelling to me, at least, than the one that I knew in sort of, the elite world.
Do you mind if I ask why you feel like things didn't go well? I mean, you obviously learned a lot from teaching at the community college, but what
What?
yeah, why do you say that you sucked at it?
Well, because it was a course, this isn't really excusable, but it was a course in myth. And most of them were there just to check the box. And I was hired a few days beforehand, and the book was Edith Hamilton's sort of well-known book on myth, sort of a standard volume. And it couldn't be more boring. And the way that you were supposed to teach it, like a friend got me the gig and he's like, it's easy. You teach them and you give them like a multiple choice, who is Zeus and how many Greek gods are there? And I don't care about that. And unfortunately, there was a, neurodivergent kid who like knew every Roman and Greek god backwards and forwards. And if I misplaced a god, she would correct me. And if I asked any question, she would just go on, and everybody else would be rolling their eyes. And I didn't want to talk about that. I wanted to talk about who they were and what the world's like. And so I just stood up there and tried to ask questions and talk about things and to get like, it was impossible to get them to talk about anything. And, I have this old fashioned belief that you should use your voice. And so I basically spent a semester trying to do that. Now, most of them turned off and half of them stopped coming altogether. And I tried to teach them how to play cribbage. I just was throwing spaghetti at the wall, but it not in an intelligent way. I should have given some structure that they could hold on to and not had this arrogant idea that I'm so entertaining that I could hook them, which I didn't. And like I say, thinking back and just after seeing this fantastic grade school, I did try to, like, I made them draw something the first few days and tried to get them to do things and they wouldn't. But I should have said, like, you will get an A on your first assignment when you take all of this paper and these markers. And I don't care how you do it, but these walls have to be covered. Otherwise, you all get an F. Like, I don't care. Something like that. And in my own way, I was sort of trying that, but it wasn't, there needed to be, unfortunately, like a little bit of a threat. That's a strong word, but I mean that because, one of the things that I've learned is people like to be well met. And unfortunately for them, being well met means like, what are the rules? What's going to happen?
So I want to ask you, what are you currently grappling with? What are the big questions, big ideas?
I think to your question, I think the two main things I'm thinking about, big things, are the thing I think about with my organization, Molly, which is paying people to give, which I
Mhm.
say more about. And then parallel to that, how we model the internet, use the internet, rather than trying to reach the whole world, we sort of make the internet a group of nodes. And I can say more about either of those. Um,
They're
just-
both interesting. Well, tell us about Molly. You mentioned it a little bit before, but what is the purpose or what are you hoping to do with Molly?
well, educationally, I mean, the first thing I did was I brought people under that name to Amsterdam to use the city as a classroom and workshop, sort
Mm.
of mixed generation of people. Youngest person 1 year was 19, the oldest I think was 60. And people just brought projects and then we would meet in small businesses, coffee shops, restaurants. And the things that were really exciting, in addition to being in Amsterdam, which is nice, were the mixed generation, and that people were working on very different things, and it was, I think, a kind of diversity that isn't used enough. So different ages, and one person was sort of working on a book, one was working on their songs. 1 year, one, person working on a business plan for the startup they wanted to see if they could make happen. And there are certainly reasons to be sort of meeting and learning from people who are really doing the thing you're doing. But these very different kinds of people doing very different kinds of projects, or maybe moderately different kinds of projects, really learned from each other. And that also helped them. And I think this is an important ambient benefit, which of course I didn't anticipate. The younger people had a certain kind of interest in the city. The older people had a different kind of interest, but those also fed off each other. And if in one way the thing we're all trying to do is understand ourselves and the world and those relationships, that was a very a compelling sort of learning that couldn't have happened in the classroom and wouldn't have happened if it was all writers who were between 30 and 40 or whatever. And
Mhm, mhm,
so that was the first thing we did. After COVID, I switched, or during COVID, switched more to being online. And what we're trying to do is find ways for people to teach what I think of as their signature course, which by
mhm,
which I mean the thing that no one else could teach. So it's not at all about teaching accounting. It's about kindergarten for adults or the Hamlet support group or poetry for entrepreneurs, things where there's no certificate at the end, but hopefully there's an unusual community that you've been brought into and a different kind of learning. I mean, I've always felt or long felt that what's important about a teacher isn't the information. And this is obviously going to be especially true as AI takes over. It's how that a teacher is somebody who models a way of being in the world. And I'm sure this is true for all of us that we probably don't remember very many things our favorite teacher said. What we remember is how they were. That is sort of the idea behind the courses. And then the money thing is just to connected to that is if you get a fellowship. So if you apply to, I don't know, Oberlin's writing program or whatever, to get any fellowship, it's great. You're given money. Wonderful, right? You have time. It takes the pressure off. I think what should be added to that is money to give, to donate, to invest to someone else's cause. In part because money is so, like everything else in the world, unilateral, so to speak. Big donors give a lot of money to to build a hospital, but no one gives money to the restaurant next to the hospital that's struggling. And I remember after some terrible catastrophe somewhere in the world, a relief worker said sometimes $5 million now is much more important than $50 million in the future. And I feel this way about taxes. If they said, okay, we're going to take your money to work to improve public transportation in schools, which used to happen, keep 1,000 of it and do what you want with it. Just show us that you gave it, you didn't spend it on Merlot or redoing your kitchen. You spent it on someone else, especially in your neighborhood.
mm.
And so
Local,
that's, what'd you
yeah,
say?
local, like a emphasis on local.
I think so. I mean, I haven't put too much pressure on people. If you want to donate it to Doctors Without Borders or there's just an
Yeah,
earthquake in Venezuela, I wouldn't object to that. But this gets to the big idea I'm thinking about in relationship to the internet,
yeah.
which is that, which also came somewhat from my time in Amsterdam. Anyone who's been there knows that, like a lot of European cities, the tourists go to this magic center. And in Amsterdam, that means canals and
Mm,
16th and 17th century buildings, and it's picturesque and incredible and wonderful. And because there are so many tourists there, even though locals definitely live in the center, a lot of people, natives, want to be outside. Or, but what you soon learn is that in the places outside the magic center, life is no worse or less beautiful, worse in quotation marks, because even if the architecture is 19th and 20th century, there's a supermarket no further than a few blocks away. Kids are walking or biking to their school. There's a park. There's a local kind of cafe. And for me, that's connected to the internet in that you can walk from the center of Amsterdam for hours and hours and hours and be in places where you could live. Now, some of that's safety. The cities, the Netherlands is very safe, but there's no, in America, we have food ghettos, right? There's none of that. And I think we need to model that on the internet. And what I mean by that is, so I live in a town of, I think, 30,000. And if you're using a credit card or ordering from Amazon, all of the money is going, I don't know where, like a bank in New York or London or wherever. Why don't we have a local credit card, which for however it works. I don't understand money at all, so I'm not the person to make it happen, which is part of the problem. But that incentivizes businesses to use it and locals to use
Mm-hmm.
it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That can't be that complicated. In the same way that we've become convinced that the only way I can buy a chair or a set of dishes is to have access to the entire world of chairs and dishes. We used to go shop in places and there were 10 or 20 versions at a department store, or even better, a local store, and we would find the thing that works for us. And strangely, what's been removed are middlemen.
Mm-hmm.
I want the middleman of the local store because they're my neighbor, because they're actually going to give me advice about what I might buy. And that money, that what the middleman used, the cut the middleman used to have, a middle person, I hope I'm not being gendered, hasn't gone right. It's just been sucked up again by the wealthiest people.
Right.
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 There's the great line in The Wire where the guy says, "We used to make things in this country. Now we just we put our hand in the other guy's pocket." Right. And we actually need those middle people in the same way we've lost a middle class.
Mm.
So, and my internet example is sort of like Amsterdam is Facebook Marketplace. I love Facebook Marketplace. I don't know anyone who doesn't love Facebook Marketplace who's a trinket finder or whatever.
Mm.
But I hate using Facebook. I don't want to use Facebook. There's got to be a kid out there who can figure out how to have Facebook Marketplace of stuff locally. I mean, basically it's Craigslist, but Craigslist doesn't have the same interface, right? And
Mm.
it's too broad, so people mostly don't like, they use it, but not for this.
Yeah.
And right, I'm not generally not going to drive more than 30 or maybe at most 60 miles to get the whatever the right side table I'm looking for. And so the node is, let's have Western Mass local marketplace, and a little bit of money goes to the local school or or to cover the costs of who's ever doing it, which is a job for them, the middle person, instead of all the money going to Silicon Valley. And technically and financially, that shouldn't be so hard to set up.
No.
It's
Yeah.
just that nobody's doing it as far as I can tell. And we're all sort of convinced that the only way to sort of shop and relate to the world is to be Taylor Swift or have access to everything that Amazon. And it isn't cheaper. I think when I go to my local hardware store, before I go to the big box store, I get good advice. I don't have to return anything. I don't have to spend the time in the big store. So I actually think it's cheaper in and of itself. But as Walmart has taught us, it's hugely more expensive socially because Main Street gets shut down because everybody's driving to Walmart to save 10 cents on whatever it is. And I totally get it that if you're concerned about where your next meal is coming from, or as far too many Americans are, sort of trying to keep their head above water, that any savings seems important. But to me, it's clear that for all of us, it's much more expensive. And I think that's being borne out by Elon Musk being a trillionaire when far too many of us are struggling to get the basic services or needs of a life. It's obscene. And people will look back on it. If anyone can believe we've allowed ourselves to get in this position, this is their play, right? They come into the town, they grab the town leaders and they say, look, there's going to be all this money for you. But like, there was a town in Louisiana where Meta is building one of these insane data centers. And Facebook just said, or Meta said, okay, but we're not going to pay taxes. We'll pay taxes for a couple of years, but then we won't pay taxes for 20 years after that. Right. So it's offering the town nothing. It's taking all of their resources. I mean, it makes this is one of the tragedies of a place like West Virginia, right? Like all this money is coming out of the hills and the poorest people in the country are there.
Yeah.
And it's exactly like that. There should be a Facebook marketplace just for a 10-mile radius. But now we're all used to like shopping. Like I can only get my backpack if it's the best in the world. And, I have to look across the world. Whatever's down at this store down the street is good enough. I've been trying to sell people on the ideas holistically, and I think I need to take these small steps towards getting there.
I was thinking there was this really interesting science experiment measuring sort of how many sort of happy chemicals are released in your brain when you receive a gift versus
Right,
how many happy
right,
chemicals are released when you give a gift.
right.
I think this was part of a lecture, The Empathic Civilization, one of those. Yeah. I think
Uh-huh.
it might have been Ken Robinson, actually. It might have someone around there.
Right.
And what they found was that there was a significant increase in happy chemicals when human beings gave gifts,
Right.
especially when they could see the person that they were giving it to. And it
Correct. That
speaks
doesn't
to,
surprise me.
right? But it speaks to like we're harming ourselves when we allow a culture to exist that prioritizes what you give for yourself. There was a rabbi, I had a question, and it was sort of a question about love and how much I was looking at love as like a set amount and like how much can I give if I don't receive any back? And he shared with me, love is like a well, and every time you give, you deepen your well.
Oh, beautiful. Beautiful. I mean, and it is this, like, we know this. We know this. That's why the oldest thing is it's better to give than receive. Like, you know, Dickens's Christmas Story or whatever isn't like it isn't some schmaltzy myth. And my belief is that the more this got going, the more money would come into the river. In the same way that, like, okay, I go to whatever school and then I write a big check, which is the whole business model, but this is at a smaller scale.
Yeah. You have
And
to
it
see the gift, actually. I think that was part of the research, is it
yes,
not just anonymously flowing out, but that you see the reception of the gift is
right.
what gets your brain really happy.
Right. But if you've given this money to give, you'll start to recognize, I hope, the dopamine that you're talking about. And, the other way I think of it is this idea that $1,000 is laser guided rain. So the kids always say, like, oh, I want to make it rain, meaning like I want to get the money. What they mean is rain on me. And that's not how rain works. Like,
Mm,
if it rains on my garden, it's also going to rain on yours. And then, when you convert this a little bit, it does nothing but rain on Wall Street and Silicon Valley. And everybody there is drowning in illness. And meanwhile, next door in the other gardens, everybody's, on Main Street, like everybody's parched. And we have to, and again, then it's really true. The typical philanthropist will come in and say, "Here's $10 million," and it kind of drowns whatever the purpose is. Because like parched earth needs time. I mean, you hear this all the time in Africa, or that yeah, they came in, but what they were really focused on was their ego and their status in giving.
mhm,
And it's
mhm.
not really about the money because they have endless money. It's about being able to tell, also cliche, but true enough, their country club friends that they did this thing. But
Yeah.
just dumping money is better than not, but it's not always, it
Yeah.
has to be done well. Giving has to be thought about a little bit,
Mhm,
I
mhm.
think.
So let me ask you this final question for those listening in who may be connecting to what you've shared with Molly's school, Molly's workshop, this model that you've shared with us. How could we support this? Those who are interested, what would it look like to get involved? We could share your email address, a website, or other things. Who are you trying to bring in?
Well, that's very kind. I just changed from Molly school to the Molly workshop. And right now, the only thing that's sort of sitting there is an invitation to this, what I wanted to be a week and has now been cut down to a couple of days. But I am going to put up the sort of vision soon.
Great.
And again, I mean, I've done it a million times in different ways, but having this conversation inspires me to do that again. So thank you. The the three main ways to help would to be to volunteer. Ultimately, I'd love to pay you, but for now, to volunteer to help build. And that means especially it either needs to be an incorporated business or a 501(c), The second thing is there are a number of classes that I sort of offer, or I want other people to offer, something called Learning Sanity and Community, which is just a meeting, the Hamlet support group, which I do myself. But again, the key thing is to get people to take them for a little money or whatever they want to pay to help fill the river. And then what would be really useful is for somebody to write out a check for $1,800,732,000, which I have
You
budgeted out
perfect.
very carefully, so I
Mm.
understand where that's going. So I'm sure 10 or 20 of your listeners will be grabbing their checkbook now. And part of the selfish reason I want to make this work is because one of the things I can do well is help people start things. I'm not a finisher myself, but when people come to me and say, I think I might want to be a baker, I can help them with that. I turn out to be quite good at helping heads of schools
Mm,
do their work because I have a
mhm,
good sense of the drama going on in
mm.
people and around them. But when somebody says, like, I don't know what I should be doing and sort of how to do it, I can help there.
Well, I'd be
If,
so happy to post links or other things if
okay, I'll send them
people
to you.
listen, want to learn more or see how they can contribute or maybe even what they could get out of a workshop. I think
I would love that.
this would appeal to tons of people and you
And
need a
I'm also
village.
always willing to talk to anyone about pretty much anything, but especially this or what they're doing. I'm always happy to
Awesome.
do that.
Ted, thank you so much for speaking with me today. It was delightful.
It was a super pleasure for me, and I hope, we'll meet in real life. We'll be in touch again.
I hope so. Okay.
Bye.
If you've enjoyed today's discussion, I invite you to share this episode and subscribe to Able Pathways podcast on your favorite platform. Your support helps us to share these meaningful conversations with more people. Have thoughts about this episode or suggestions for future guests? We would love to hear from you. Leave us a comment or email us at hello@ablepathways.com. Until next time, I'm Annabelle, reminding you that there are infinite pathways to growth. May you travel yours with curiosity and courage.